The wind didn't whisper in the Wind River Range. It screamed. Callum Rivers stood on the porch of his cabin, hands braced on the railing that he'd built with Elena 6 years ago. The wood was rough under his palms, worn smooth in places where he stood exactly like this every evening, watching the mountains swallow the sun. He was 58 years old and looked every year of it. 6'1", lean in the way men get when they stop caring about food and start caring only about function. His hair was more silver than brown, now cut short in a habit he couldn't break from 26 years in the Marines. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, hiding the scar on his jaw from a piece of shrapnel that had come too close in Fallujah. His eyes were grey, storm cloud grey, the kind of grey that had seen too much and remembered all of it. January 28th, 2024. 6 in the evening. The temperature was already dropping through the teens, heading for single digits by midnight. The sky to the west was the colour of old bruises, purple and black and swollen with snow. Callum felt the pressure change before he saw the storm. His bad knee, the one that still carried fragments of an IED blast from 2 decades ago, ached with a deep, bone-cold certainty. Big storm, the kind that buried the high country and didn't let go for weeks. At his feet sat Ranger. The dog was a German shepherd 6 years old with a coat that ran silver-grey and black like smoke over charcoal. He weighed 85 pounds of trained muscle and sharp intelligence. His ears were up radar dishes scanning the tree line. His dark eyes tracked movement Callum couldn't see yet, processing information his human would never catch. Ranger had been a military working dog. Explosive detection, 3rd Military Police Detachment attached to units in Kandahar. His handler, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, had been killed by a sniper in May 2020. The dog had stayed with the body for 6 hours until extraction arrived, refusing to leave his fallen partner. Callum had adopted Ranger 3 months later in August 2020 through a Marine canine network that connected retired handlers with dogs who needed homes. It had been 6 months since Elena died. 6 months of silence so complete it felt like drowning. The dog had saved him, not in any dramatic way, just by needing to be fed, needing to be walked, needing something from Callum when he had nothing left to give. Now they were bonded in the way soldiers bond, not through words, through presence, through the shared understanding that the world was a hard place and you didn't survive it alone. "Storm's coming," Callum said. His voice was rough from disuse. He'd spoken maybe 50 words in the past week, all of them to the dog. Ranger's tail moved once. Acknowledgement. Callum turned and looked through the window into the cabin. It was small. One main room with a kitchen along the back wall, a stone fireplace that dominated the east side, a bedroom and bathroom carved into the original structure. The furniture was simple. A couch that had seen better days, a wooden table with 2 chairs, bookshelves made from reclaimed barnwood filled with paperbacks and field manuals and geology texts that had belonged to Elena. On the mantel above the fireplace sat one photograph. Callum and Elena taken 4 years ago before the cancer. She was laughing in the picture, her dark hair caught by the wind, her hand on Ranger's head. The dog had been younger then, still adjusting to civilian life, still searching every room for explosives that weren't there. Callum didn't look at the photograph often. When he did, it felt like taking shrapnel all over again. The kitchen table was covered in papers. Bills, mostly. Red-stamped notices that screamed final and overdue and legal action pending, and one letter received 3 days ago that sat on top of the pile like an executioner's blade. Wyoming Regional Bank. Notice of default. 45 days until foreclosure proceedings. $127,000 owed. Eleanor's medical bills had been catastrophic. Cancer didn't care that she was only 43, didn't care that she was a geologist with a sharp mind and a good heart, didn't care that Callum would have given every drop of blood in his body to save her. The treatments had bankrupted them. The funeral had finished the job. For 4 years, Callum had been juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul, staying 1 month ahead of complete collapse. Now the calendar had run out. 45 days. Then this cabin, this last piece of Elena, would belong to the bank. He'd thought about it, letting it go, walking away. The Marine Corps had taught him how to live with nothing but what he could carry. But every time he reached for that solution, he'd see Eleanor's face, hear her voice. "This is ours, Cal. We built this. Don't you ever let it go." So he stayed, and he fought, and he bled money he didn't have. The satellite phone on the kitchen counter rang. The sound was jarring artificial wrong in the cathedral silence of the mountains. Callum's shoulders tensed. He hated that phone, hated what it represented. Connection, contact, the world reaching in. Ranger's ears swiveled toward the sound, but he didn't move, waiting for Callum's command. Callum walked inside his boots, heavy on the wooden floor, and picked up the receiver. Rivers? Oh, thank goodness, Callum, I caught you. The voice was thin, crackled by static and distance. Lenora Hatch. His nearest neighbour, though nearest, meant 12 miles down the mountain on a road that was more suggestion than pavement. Lenora was 67, a widow since her husband died 9 years ago. Army Ranger killed in a training accident at Fort Benning. She'd stayed in Wyoming afterward, running a small rental property operation out of stubbornness and the need to keep moving. She'd been kind to Callum after Elena died, brought food he didn't eat, sat in silence when silence was all he could offer. Never pushed, never demanded. She was one of maybe 3 people in the world he could tolerate. Lenora. What's wrong? It's this storm, hun. Her voice was tight with worry. Forecast says it's going to be biblical. And I've got renters in the Aspen cabin. Young couple. They were supposed to check in this afternoon, but I haven't heard a peep. I'm stuck down in Lander at my sister's and I've got a bad feeling. Callum looked out the window. The first snowflakes were starting to fall fat and wet, the kind that meant business. The Aspen cabin was 5 miles deeper into the backcountry, accessible only by a logging road that was treacherous in good weather and suicidal in bad. Every instinct he had said no. Stay here. Stay isolated. Stay safe behind the walls he'd built. But Lenora had never asked him for anything, and her voice had that edge, the one that said something was genuinely wrong. How long until the roads close? Weather service says 4 hours, maybe less. A pause. I know it's asking a lot, Callum. I know you like your quiet, but if they're up there and they're not prepared... I'll check it. Oh, bless you. I mean it. Just see if they're there. If they are, tell them the emergency kit is under the sink. If they're not, I'll lock it up. Callum's voice was flat. Mission parameters. Objectives. Execute. Thank you. I owe you. He hung up without responding. Stood for a moment, hand still on the receiver, jaw tight. Ranger had moved to the door. The dog knew. Change in routine meant action. Action meant purpose. Callum grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. Heavy brown leather, cracked and worn, left unzipped. Beneath it, he wore a flannel shirt in navy and grey. Faded Levi's that had seen a decade of use. Work boots with tread that still bit, because in this country, traction was survival. He pulled his gear from the closet. A tactical flashlight, military grade. A first aid kit, because combat medic training didn't fade just because you retired. A fixed blade knife on his belt concealed by the jacket. No firearm. He'd stopped carrying after Elena died. The weight felt wrong without a mission to justify it. Load up, he said to Ranger. The dog was through the door before Callum finished speaking, a grey streak against the white ground. The truck was a 1998 Ford F-150 forest green, with rust eating the wheel wells and 200,000 miles on the odometer. It started on the second try, engine coughing in the cold before settling into a rough idle. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat, sitting upright alert, watching. Callum put the truck in gear and headed down the mountain. The drive was slow, deliberate. The snow was coming down harder now, big flakes that stuck to the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Visibility was maybe 50 feet and dropping. The logging road was a single lane of frozen mud and exposed rock, winding through pine forests so dense they blocked what little light remained. Callum drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes scanning constantly. Terrain, obstacles, egress routes. The same way he'd driven in Fallujah, waiting for the IED, the ambush, the moment everything went sideways. Ranger sat motionless beside him, but Callum could see the tension in the dog's posture. Ears forward, nose working, processing scents through the heating vents. Snow, pine, cold earth, and something else. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, the Aspen cabin appeared through the trees. It was smaller than Callum's place. A simple A-frame with a green metal roof and a narrow porch. Dark. No lights in the windows. No vehicle in the clearing that served as a parking area. Callum killed the engine. Sat for a moment listening. The wind. The creak of pine branches under snow. Nothing else. Stay. He stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a fist, sharp and immediate. Wind chill was probably 20 below now. Exposed skin would get frostbite in under 10 minutes. He walked toward the cabin, boots crunching in fresh snow. No tracks. No tire marks. The place looked abandoned. Behind him, inside the truck, Ranger exploded. The barking was sudden, frantic, nothing like the controlled alerts Callum had heard before. This was different. Urgent. The dog threw himself against the passenger window, paws, scrabbling at the glass, a continuous string of deep, rapid barks that cut through the wind. Callum froze. Turned. Ranger was going insane. Not aggressive, not protective. This was a rescue alert. The same bark military working dogs used when they found survivors in rubble, when they detected someone in distress, when every fibre of their training screamed that a human needed help. "Ranger, knock it off!" The dog ignored him, kept barking, kept clawing at the door. A cold dread separate from the weather settled in Callum's gut. He'd served with dog handlers in Iraq. He'd seen what these animals could do. Their senses were beyond human comprehension. If Ranger said someone was in trouble, someone was in trouble. Callum walked back to the truck and opened the passenger door. Ranger shot out like he'd been launched. Didn't check the perimeter, didn't clear the area. Just ran straight to the cabin's front door and reared up front paws, slamming into the wood with enough force to rattle the frame. The barking intensified, desperate, demanding. Callum joined him on the porch, put his hand on the doorknob. It turned, unlocked. Every tactical instinct he had went on alert. He pushed the door open slowly, staying to the side of the frame out of the fatal funnel. "This is Callum Rivers. Lenora Hatch asked me to check the cabin." No response. The interior was freezing, darker than it should be. The air was heavy with cold and something else. A faint smell. Expensive. Perfume. Completely out of place in a rental cabin in the middle of nowhere. Ranger pushed past him, heading directly for the main room. Callum followed, pulling out his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping the space. Empty kitchen. Empty sitting area. No fire in the wood stove. No supplies visible. Then the light found her. She was huddled in the far corner of the room, almost invisible in the gloom, sitting in a wheelchair. A modern one, lightweight aluminum, but one of the large wheels was bent at a sickening angle, the spokes broken and twisted. She was wrapped in a thin, decorative blanket, the kind of useless thing rental properties kept for aesthetics. Her blonde hair was matted, tangled. Her face was pale, bloodless. Her lips had a blue tinge that Callum recognized immediately. Hypothermia. Stage 2, maybe worse. She was shivering so violently the entire wheelchair rattled against the wooden floor with a soft, rhythmic sound. Her eyes were open but unfocused, glazed with shock and cold. When she saw Callum, saw the flashlight, she flinched. Her hands came up weakly defensive, terrified. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp, barely audible. "Please don't hurt me." Callum stopped, held position, kept his voice level, calm, the same tone he'd used with wounded Marines who were going into shock. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Callum. I'm Lenora's neighbour. Are you injured?" The woman stared at him. Tears were frozen on her pale cheeks, actual ice crystals at the corners of her eyes. She tried to speak but couldn't seem to form the words. Her jaw was locked from the shivering. Ranger approached her slowly now, the frantic barking replaced by a low, questioning whine. He sniffed her boots, her hands processing information. Then he looked back at Callum. The message was clear. "She's in trouble. Do something." Callum took a knee in front of her, staying just outside arm's reach. Non-threatening, assessing. "Can you tell me your name?" Julia." The word came out in pieces. "Julia Ashford." "Okay, Julia. I need to know. Are you hurt? Bleeding any broken bones?" She shook her head. The movement was sluggish, delayed. Definitely hypothermic. My fiancé." Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. "Damien, we had a fight. He just left. He pushed me and—" She gestured weakly at the broken wheelchair. "He took the car. He said I was." Her voice broke. More tears. She was shutting down physically and emotionally. Callum looked around the cabin. No heat. No power. The pipes would freeze within hours if they hadn't already. The temperature inside was maybe 35 degrees. Outside it was 20 and dropping fast with wind chill down to -20. She wouldn't last the night. Wouldn't last 4 hours. His cabin was 2 miles back the way he'd come. It had heat, supplies, a wood stove and a generator. It was defensible. Every part of him screamed to leave her, to walk away, to maintain the walls he'd built. He didn't do people anymore. Didn't do complications. Didn't do anything that required him to care. But he looked at her face, saw the fear, the cold, the helplessness. And he saw Elena in a hospital bed, skin-grey body failing, looking at him with eyes that begged him to do something, anything to make it stop. He'd been helpless then. A combat medic trained to stabilize wounds under fire, and he couldn't do a damn thing to save his wife. He wasn't helpless now. "All right," Callum said, his voice firm, decisive. "Here's what's going to happen. We're not staying here.
My cabin is 2 miles back. It's warm. It's safe. I'm going to carry you to my truck. Do you understand? Julia stared at him, tried to process through the fog of hypothermia. I can't. The chair. I can't. I can see that. He moved closer. I'm going to pick you up now, if you can put your arms around my neck. If you can't, that's okay. I've got you. He slid one arm under her legs, the other behind her back. She was lighter than he expected. Maybe 120. The blanket stayed wrapped around her as he lifted. She let out a small sound, half gasp, half sob.
But she didn't fight. Her arms came up weakly, hands grasping at his jacket collar. "Ranger, heel!" The dog immediately moved to Callum's left side, the position he'd held for his handler in Afghanistan, the position that meant protection, guidance, trust. Callum turned and carried Julia Ashford out of the dark cabin and into the storm. The trip back was a war. The wind had picked up, gusting to 40, maybe 50 miles per hour. The snow was no longer falling. It was being driven horizontally, a white wall of ice crystals that tore at exposed skin and made it impossible to see more than 5 feet. Callum held Julia close to his chest, using his body as a windbreak. Her face was pressed against his jacket, her breathing shallow and fast against his collarbone. The blanket whipped and snapped in the wind, but he kept it wrapped around her with sheer, stubborn pressure. Ranger stayed pressed against his left leg, a solid, warm presence in the chaos. The dog knew the way. Had walked this route 100 times. His nose was better than GPS, his memory infallible. Callum's knees screamed. Every step on the uneven, snow-covered ground sent pain lancing up his leg, but he didn't slow, couldn't slow. Hypothermia was a countdown. Every minute in the cold was a minute closer to irreversible damage. His combat medic training ran through his head like a checklist. Mild hypothermia, 95 to 90 degrees core temp. Shivering confusion, poor coordination. Moderate 90 to 82 degrees. Violent shivering, then no shivering. Slurred speech. Irrational behavior. Severe below 82. Unconsciousness. Cardiac arrest. Death. Julia was somewhere between mild and moderate. The violent shivering was a good sign. It meant her body was still fighting. When the shivering stopped, that's when people died. The truck appeared through the snow like a ghost. Callum pulled the passenger door open one-handed, set Julia inside as gently as he could manage. Ranger jumped in after her, positioning himself between her and the door, providing body heat. Callum got behind the wheel, started the engine, cranked the heat to maximum. "Stay awake," he said. "Not a request, an order. Julia, eyes open. Talk to me." Cold. She was curled in on herself, the blanket clutched around her like armor. "I know. We're moving. 2 minutes." He drove by feel more than sight. The road was gone, buried under snow, but he'd driven this route in the dark, in storms, in conditions that would have stopped anyone without military training. Muscle memory, terrain awareness, the same skills that had kept him alive in Iraq. The cabin emerged from the storm. Callum pulled as close to the porch as he could, killed the engine. "Ranger, inside, clear." The dog was out and moving, bounding through knee-deep snow to the porch, then waiting at the door. Ready. Callum lifted Julia again. She was barely conscious now, her eyes half closed, the shivering starting to slow. Not good. He moved fast, carrying her up the porch steps through the door. Ranger held position beside. The cabin was warm. The fire he'd banked before leaving was still going, low coals that pulsed orange in the dim light. The contrast from outside to inside was so stark, it felt like passing through a portal. "I'm putting you on the couch," Callum said. "Don't fight me." He set her down on the overstuffed sofa that faced the fireplace, immediately went to work, added 3 large logs to the fire, used a bellows to drive oxygen into the coals. Flames caught, spread, roared to life. Heat began rolling across the room in visible waves. He turned back to Julia. She was slumped on the couch, the blanket around her eyes closed. "Stay awake. That's an order." He went to the kitchen, moving with economy born of routine. Filled a heavy ceramic mug with water, put it in the microwave. Waited the 30 seconds, pulled it out. Added instant coffee, strong, hot enough to scald. He brought it back to her, knelt beside the couch. "Coffee. Hot. You need to drink it." She tried to reach for the mug, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't grip it. He could see the frustration in her face, the humiliation. Without a word, Callum took her hands in his. They were ice, bloodless. He wrapped them around the mug, his own hands covering hers, forcing her fingers to close to hold. "Feel the heat," he said. "Drink." She raised the mug to her lips with his help, took a small sip, coughed, took another. The liquid was doing its job. Internal warming, core temperature stabilization. My chair, she whispered. He broke it. I can't. I know. It's still in the truck. We'll deal with it later. His voice was flat, matter of fact. Right now, you drink that coffee and you get warm. He released her hand, stood. Went to the hall closet and pulled out 2 thick wool blankets, military surplus army green, heavy and warm. He brought them back, draped one over her lap, held the other. You need to get out of the wet clothes. Panic flashed in her eyes. I'll turn my back, he said. Put the blanket around you. I'm not asking. Wet clothes in this cold will kill you. He turned away, giving her privacy, faced the fire, waited. Behind him, he heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of someone struggling with cold, stiffened fingers. It took longer than it should have. He didn't comment, just waited. Okay, she said finally. Her voice was small. He turned back. She was wrapped in the blanket, cocooned, only her face visible. Her wet clothes were in a pile on the floor. Callum picked them up, carried them to the bathroom, hung them over the shower rod. Then he returned, added more wood to the fire, checked the damper. The lights flickered, went out. The generator kicked in 30 seconds later, a distant rumble from the shed outside. Emergency lighting came on soft and amber, but Callum preferred the firelight. He switched the electric lights off. Generator's automatic, he said, but I like the quiet. He looked at Julia, really looked at her for the first time. Blonde hair tangled and damp, features that would have been pretty under different circumstances, eyes that were blue or maybe grey, hard to tell in the firelight. Mid-30s, he guessed, expensive bone structure, manicured nails even under the grime. And that perfume, Chanel maybe, something that cost more than his monthly food budget. She didn't belong here, didn't fit. A woman like this should be in a penthouse somewhere, not freezing in a mountain cabin. Questions formed in his mind, but he didn't ask them. Not his business, not his problem. She was a mission objective now. Keep alive, keep warm, extract when possible. Ranger had positioned himself on his usual rug by the hearth, but his eyes weren't on the fire. They were on Julia, watching, assessing. The dog's head was up, ears forward, not aggressive, just analytical. The dog won't hurt you, Callum said. He's trained. He'll watch you, but he won't approach unless you're in distress. What's his name? Ranger. Military. Was. Callum moved to the window, checked the storm. Complete whiteout. Zero visibility. His handler was killed in Afghanistan. I adopted him 4 years ago. He didn't mention Elena. Didn't explain that 4 years ago meant right after she died. Didn't talk about how the dog had been the only reason he got out of bed for 6 months. Thank you, Julia whispered, for helping me. I don't know what I would have. Don't thank me. His voice was sharp-cutting. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Lenora. And I did it for the dog. He doesn't like to see things freeze. It was cruel. He knew it was cruel. But it was also the truth. He hadn't saved her out of kindness. He'd saved her because the alternative was listening to a woman die 2 miles away while he did nothing. He couldn't do that again. Julia's face fell. She looked down at the coffee mug in her hands, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Callum picked up a third blanket, the one he'd grabbed from the closet, and dropped it on the arm of the couch. Storm's locked in, he said. His voice was emotionless, professional. Weather Service said 7 to 10 days before the plows run this road. Could be longer. He looked at her directly. You're stuck here, with me, in this cabin. Understand? She nodded slowly. Good. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself water, drank it standing at the sink. Fire needs feeding every 2 hours. I'll take first watch. Get some sleep. He picked up his rifle from beside the door. An old Remington 700 in .308 scope, mounted well-maintained. He checked the action with practiced ease, the sound of metal on metal, precise and final. Then he set it back down. He pulled the rocking chair from the corner, positioned it away from the fire, away from her, and sat. Picked up a book from the side table, some paperback thriller he'd been working through for a month. Message delivered. Mission parameters set. Guard duty established. Julia Ashford sat on the couch, wrapped in army surplus blankets, holding a mug of instant coffee in a cabin that belonged to a stranger. Ranger lay on his rug by the fire, a grey shadow in the flickering light. His eyes never left her. Watching. Waiting. Judging. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the silence was absolute. And Callum Rivers, who had spent 4 years building walls around the wreckage of his heart, had just let a stranger inside his fortress. The first full day of the storm was a lesson in silence. Callum woke at 0500, the same time he'd woken for 30 years. No alarm. No need. His body was a clock wound tight by Marine Corps routine, and it didn't care that he'd been out of uniform for 14 years. The cabin was cold, not dangerously cold, but enough that he could see his breath in the grey pre-dawn light. The fire had burned down to coals during the night. He'd let it go too low, distracted by the presence of another human being in his space. He stood from the rocking chair where he'd spent the night, joints protesting. 58 years old, and every one of them lived hard. His knee cracked audibly as he put weight on it. Ranger was already awake, sitting by the door, waiting. The dog's routine matched his own. Had for 4 years. Callum fed the fire first. 3 logs precisely placed. Used the bellows to bring the coals back to life. Heat began to build again, pushing back the cold. He glanced at the couch. Julia was still there, buried under the blankets, only the top of her blonde head visible. She was breathing. That was enough. "Out," he said quietly to Ranger. The dog stood, immediately moved to the door. Callum pulled on his jacket, his boots, and stepped into the storm. It was still going. Not as violent as last night, but steady, relentless. Snow had piled 3 feet deep against the porch railings. The wind was a constant 20-mile-per-hour push from the northwest. Temperature was 5 degrees wind chill, 20 below. Callum waded through the drifts to the woodshed, filled his arms with split logs, brought them back. Made 3 trips. Ranger did his business in the designated area, then bounded back to the porch, shaking snow from his coat in an explosion of white powder. Inside again. Locked the door. Shed the jacket. Back to routine. Callum made coffee. The real kind, not instant. Ground beans. French press. Boiling water. The ritual was meditative. Precise. The smell filled the cabin, rich and dark. He poured 1 mug. Sat at the kitchen table. Looked at the stack of bills that mocked him every morning. 45 days until foreclosure. Now 44. He'd been doing the math for weeks. Knew it didn't work. Even if he stopped eating, stopped buying fuel, stopped everything except keeping the lights on, he couldn't make $127,000 appear out of thin air. The cabin was worth maybe $200,000 in this market, less probably this far from anything. But it had a lien against it. Medical debt, hospital debt, debt that had eaten Elena alive and was now eating everything she'd left behind. He could sell it, pay off the bank, walk away with maybe 50 grand and no home. Or he could let the bank take it, walk away with nothing and no home. Either way, he lost the last piece of her. Behind him on the couch, Julia stirred. A small sound. Movement under the blankets. Callum didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge her. Just drank his coffee and stared at numbers that wouldn't add up. She didn't speak for the first 2 hours. Neither did he. Callum went about his day as if she didn't exist. He made oatmeal on the wood stove, 1 bowl, set it on the table, ate it standing up, looking out the window at the white void. When he was done, he washed the bowl, put it away, poured another coffee. Then, as an afterthought, he poured a 2nd mug, walked to the couch, set it on the small table beside her without a word. Julia's eyes were open, watching him, red-rimmed, exhausted. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond, just walked away. At 900 hours he made a 2nd bowl of oatmeal. This one he set on the table near the couch, along with a bottle of water, a spoon. Still didn't speak, just left it there and went back to his chair. She ate slowly. He could hear the spoon against the bowl, small and deliberate. When she was done, she set it back on the table. "I can't," she started. Her voice was rough. "I can't reach the bathroom. I'm sorry. I just—" "Can you stand?" His voice was flat, clinical. "No. I the wheelchair." "Can you support weight on your legs at all, even with help?" She hesitated. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. "No. I'm paralyzed. From a car accident. 6 months ago. I can't." Callum looked at her. Really looked. Studied her face for tells. Inconsistencies. She held his gaze, but barely. There was something there. Something off. But it wasn't his business. "All right," he said. "I'll bring the chair in. It's broken, but it might roll." He went outside, waded through the snow to the truck. The wheelchair was in the bed, buried under 8 inches of fresh powder. He pulled it out, inspected it. 1 wheel was bent, the frame twisted. It would roll barely on flat surfaces. He brought it inside, brushed the snow off, set it beside the couch. "You'll have to transfer yourself.
I'm not. He stopped, changed direction. I'll turn around. He did. Faced the kitchen.
Waited. Behind him, sounds of struggle, fabric moving, a small grunt of effort, the creak of the wheelchair as weight settled into it. "Okay," she said. He turned. She was in the chair, the blanket draped over her lap. Her face was flushed with exertion or embarrassment. The bathroom was on the main level past the kitchen, flat floor. He'd built it that way when Elena started getting sick, knowing she might need accessibility. He pushed the chair without asking, positioned it outside the bathroom door. "Can you manage?" "Yes." She wouldn't look at him. He walked away, gave her privacy, stood by the window and watched the storm. 10 minutes later she emerged, wheeled herself slowly back to the couch area, the broken wheel wobbling and catching. Callum didn't help, didn't offer, just watched her struggle, his face expressionless. When she was settled again, blankets repositioned, he spoke. "Storm's going to last at least a week, maybe longer. Food's not a problem. Water's not a problem. Heat's not a problem." He paused. "Space is." She looked at him, waiting. "This is a small cabin. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. You're on the couch. I'll sleep in the chair. We stay out of each other's way. Understand?" "Yes." "I'm not a talker. Don't expect conversation. Don't expect company. You're here because the alternative was dying in the cold. That's all this is." She flinched. Just slightly. But nodded. "Good." He went back to his routine. Checked the windows. Checked the generator fuel level. Checked the propane. All the small maintenance tasks that kept a man alive in the high country. Ranger watched from his rug by the fire. The dog hadn't approached Julia since they'd arrived. Hadn't shown aggression, but hadn't shown interest either. Just observation. Assessment. The silence stretched. Hours passed. The only sounds were the wind, the fire, and the occasional creak of the cabin settling under the weight of snow. It was on the 3rd night that everything changed. Callum had been dozing in the rocking chair, the rifle across his lap, when he heard it. A sound so soft he almost missed it. A hitch in breathing. A caught sob. He opened his eyes. Julia was crying. Trying not to. Failing. Her face was turned toward the fire, one hand pressed to her mouth, shoulders shaking with the effort of staying quiet. Silent tears ran down her cheeks, catching the firelight. Callum closed his eyes again. Not his problem, not his business. But the sound continued. Small, broken, desperate. On his rug by the hearth, Ranger's head came up. His ears swiveled toward Julia. He stood a slow, deliberate movement. Callum's eyes snapped open. Watched. The dog approached the couch. Not fast, not aggressive, just curious. He stopped 3 feet away, head tilted, studying her. Julia didn't seem to notice, lost in whatever private hell she was navigating. Ranger took another step. Closer. His nose worked, processing scents, salt from tears, stress hormones, fear, loneliness. Things a military working dog was trained to detect in wounded soldiers, in people who needed help. The dog whined, a low, soft sound, not a warning, a question. Julia looked up, startled, saw Ranger standing there watching her with dark, intelligent eyes. "Hey, boy," she whispered. Her voice broke on the words. Ranger took the final step. He was at the edge of the couch now, close enough to touch. He sniffed her hand where it rested on the blanket. Then slowly, deliberately, he rested his head on the edge of the couch, on her knee, right where her hand could reach. Not demanding, offering. Julia's hand moved, shaking, hesitant. She touched the top of his head, fingers sinking into the thick grey fur. Ranger's eyes closed. He leaned into the touch, let out a long, heavy sigh. Then he shifted, positioning himself so his head was fully on her lap, his body pressed against the front of the couch. Close, warm, present. From his chair across the room, Callum sat frozen. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what he was seeing. Ranger, his dog, Elena's dog. The animal who hadn't let anyone touch him except Callum in 4 years. The dog who had stood guard at Elena's grave for 3 hours after the funeral, refusing to leave until Callum physically carried him away. That dog had just chosen a stranger. Something cracked open in Callum's chest, something he'd kept sealed and buried and locked away. He stood abruptly. The rocking chair scraped against the floor. Both Julia and Ranger looked at him. Callum said nothing, just turned and walked out the door into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't grabbed his jacket, didn't care. Just walked off the porch into knee-deep snow, kept walking until the cabin was a dim shape behind him. The wind tore at his flannel shirt. Snow drove into his face, stinging, blinding. His knee screamed with every step. He stopped 50 yards out, stood in the storm, let it rage around him. Elena's voice in his head clear as if she were standing next to him. "Don't let the quiet kill you, Cal. Let someone in." She'd said it 3 days before she died. Morphine making her words soft and slurred, but the message clear. She'd known he would do this. Build walls, hide, become a ghost. "I can't," he'd told her. "I don't know how to do this without you. You find a way. You always find a way. Promise me." He'd promised, lied. Same thing. And now a stranger was in his cabin, crying on his couch, and his dog, the last living piece of Elena's world, had offered her comfort. Not him, the dog. What did that say about him? Callum looked up at the black sky, snow driving into his face. "I don't know how to do this," he said out loud to no one. To Eleanor, to God, to the mountain. "I don't know how to let her in." The storm didn't answer. It never did. He stood there for 5 more minutes, letting the cold leach into his bones until his hands were numb and his face felt like stone. Then he turned and walked back. When he came through the door, Julia was asleep. Ranger was still there, head on her lap, eyes open, watching the door. The dog's tail moved once when Callum entered. A small wag. Acknowledgement. Callum shook the snow from his hair, hung his jacket on the hook. His hands were white, bloodless. He ran them under lukewarm water in the kitchen sink until feeling returned in needles of pain. He looked at the couch, at the woman and the dog. Something had shifted. He could feel it. A crack in the ice. Not a thaw, not yet, but the beginning of one. He dried his hands, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the bills and the foreclosure notice and the weight of 4 years of grief. And for the first time since Eleanor died, he didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, Callum made 2 bowls of oatmeal. He didn't say anything, just set one on the table near Julia's couch, the other at his place. She was awake, watching him. Ranger was still close to her, lying on the floor beside the couch instead of his usual rug. "Thank you," she said quietly. This time Callum nodded, just slightly. Acknowledgement. He ate his breakfast. She ate hers. The silence was still there, but it had changed. Less hostile, more coexistent. When she was done, he collected her bowl without comment, washed it, put it away. Then he looked at the broken wheelchair, at the 3 steps that led from the living room level up to the kitchen and front door. 3 steps, shallow, wide, but they might as well have been a mountain. She'd been trapped on the lower level for 3 days. Couldn't access the porch, couldn't see outside except through the small window near the couch, couldn't reach the kitchen without his help, imprisoned by 3 wooden steps. Callum walked to those steps, stood there looking at them, measuring with his eyes. Julia watched him confused. He didn't explain, just went to the hall closet, pulled out a measuring tape, measured the height of each step, the width, the total rise, wrote the numbers on a scrap of paper with a carpenter's pencil. Then he put on his jacket and boots and went outside. The workshop was a separate structure attached to the woodshed, 12 by 12, unheated but weather-tight. It smelled like sawdust and old motor oil and Elena's geology equipment that he couldn't bring himself to move. Callum stood in the doorway, snow swirling around him, looking at the workbench. He hadn't built anything since she died. The tools hung on their pegboard, organized and maintained, but unused. Building things had been their project, their shared language. She'd designed, he'd executed. Together they'd made this cabin into a home. He looked at the numbers on the scrap of paper, did the math in his head. Angle, length, support requirements, a ramp, simple, functional, 3 2x4s for the frame, 3/4-inch plywood for the surface, secure it to the existing steps with lag bolts. It would work. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. He pulled the materials from the storage rack, carried them to the workbench, picked up a saw, and he started to build. The work was meditative. Measure twice, cut once. The old rule. The saw moved through the wood with a rhythmic rasp that cut through the wind, each cut precise, each angle exact. He'd learned carpentry in the Marines, then refined it with Elena. She'd taught him patience, attention to detail. The way wood had grain and character, the way you worked with it instead of against it. His hands remembered, moved without conscious thought. Cut, sand, fit, test. 2 hours later, he had a ramp. Raw plywood 2x4 frame, solid and functional. Ugly as sin, but engineered to hold 300 pounds without flexing. He carried it back to the cabin through the storm. Julia was awake, sitting up on the couch when he came through the door carrying the ramp. Her eyes went wide. Callum said nothing, just manoeuvred the ramp into position, set it over the 3 steps. It locked into place with the precision he'd designed into it. He tested it with his own weight. Solid, no movement. Then he went to her wheelchair, inspected the bent wheel again. The frame was aluminum lightweight, the wheel was steel. He gripped the rim with both hands and pulled. Metal screamed, bent. He adjusted his grip, pulled again. The wheel slowly returned to something close to round. Not perfect.
It would wobble, but it would roll. He pushed the wheelchair to her. Let's test it. She transferred from the couch, her movements careful, controlled. Too controlled. Some distant part of his brain noted, but he pushed the observation aside. He pushed her up the ramp. The wheel wobbled, but held. The plywood didn't flex. At the top, she was level with the kitchen, level with the front door. Callum wheeled her to the door, opened it. Cold air rushed in, but so did light, and space, and the vast white world beyond the cabin. Julia made a sound. Small. Broken. Not quite a sob. He wheeled her onto the covered porch. The overhang had kept most of the snow off, leaving a clear space, maybe 8 feet by 6. The storm had gentled, not stopped but softened. Visibility was maybe 100 yards. She could see the trees, the mountains beyond, the sky.
Callum stood beside her wheelchair, one hand braced on the railing. Eleanor had sanded smooth, looking out at the same view he'd looked at 10,000 times. "Thank you," Julia whispered. "You didn't have to. It's just wood." His voice was gruff, uncomfortable with gratitude. Practical, that's all. But it wasn't. And they both knew it. They stood there in silence, 2 strangers and a storm, and something unnamed passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the acknowledgement that walls once built could be breached. Behind them, through the open door, Ranger watched from inside. His tail moved slowly, back and forth. Approval. That evening, Callum made soup. Canned vegetable beef. Nothing fancy, heated on the wood stove, but he made enough for 2. They ate in silence, but it was a different silence. Shared instead of imposed. After dinner, he wheeled her back down the ramp to the couch. Then he sat in his rocking chair with a book, and she sat under her blankets, and Ranger lay between them. The dog's head was on his paws, but his eyes tracked both of them, connecting them whether they wanted to be connected or not. At 8, Julia spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Callum looked up from his book. Waited. "How long have you lived here?" 4 years full-time. Built it over 3 years before that." "By yourself?" "With my wife." The words came out harder than he intended. Julia went quiet, processing. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For what?" "For intruding. On your space. Your grief." Callum closed the book, looked at her directly. "You didn't intrude. The storm did. You're just caught in it." Still, he studied her face in the firelight, tried to read what was there. Guilt, loneliness, something else he couldn't name. "Why were you up here?" he asked. "In January, in a rental cabin, in the middle of nowhere." She looked away. "I needed to get away." "From what?" "Everything." Her voice was small. "From a life that didn't feel real anymore." Callum understood that, more than she knew. "And your fiancé, the one who left you?" Her jaw tightened. "Damien. He was never really there, even when he was, if that makes sense." It did. "Why stay with him?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I thought I loved him. Or maybe I loved the idea of not being alone." Callum nodded slowly. Put the book aside. "My wife," he said, surprising himself. "She died 4 years ago. February 2020. Cancer. Took her in 6 months." Julia looked at him, really looked, and he saw tears in her eyes. "This cabin," he continued, "we built it together. It was supposed to be our place, our quiet, after I retired from the Marines." He gestured around the room. "Now it's just mine, and most days I don't know what to do with it." "But you stayed. Where else would I go?" It wasn't really a question. "This is all I have left of her. Of us." Understanding passed between them. Different griefs, different losses, but the same fundamental loneliness. "Her name?" Julia asked softly. "Eleanor." "Tell me about her." Callum looked at the photograph on the mantel. Eleanor laughing, wind in her hair hand on Ranger's head. And for the first time in 4 years, he talked about his wife to someone other than the dog. He told Julia about Elena's work as a geologist, how she'd spend weeks in the field, mapping formations coming back covered in dust and full of stories, how she'd taught him to see the mountain not as terrain, but as time, each layer a chapter in an ancient book, how she'd loved this place with a fierce protective love, how the cancer had been sudden and brutal and utterly without mercy, how he'd tried to save her with every skill he had and failed completely, how the bills from that failure were going to take the last piece of her in 44 days. He didn't know why he was saying all this, didn't know why the words were coming after 4 years of silence. But they came, and Julia listened, didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes, just listened. When he was done, she was crying quietly, not for herself, for him, for Eleanor, for the weight of love and loss. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry, Callum." He nodded, looked away. The vulnerability was uncomfortable, raw, but not entirely unwelcome. Ranger stood stretched and walked to Callum's chair, rested his head on Callum's knee, a gesture of comfort, support. Callum's hand found the dog's head, stroked the soft ears. "He was hers," Callum said quietly. "She trained him. When she got sick, he'd lie next to her bed for hours, just being there. When she died, he searched the whole cabin for 3 days, looking for her. And now he's yours. Now he's all I've got." Julia watched the dog and the man, the bond between them, visible and profound. "You're lucky," she said, "to have had that, to still have him." Callum looked at her, at this stranger in a wheelchair in his cabin, this woman who'd been abandoned by someone who was supposed to love her. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I guess I am." The fire crackled. The storm continued its assault outside, and inside, 3 damaged souls sat in the warm light, connected by nothing more than circumstance and the slow opening of ice-locked hearts. The 8th day of the storm broke with an eerie stillness. Callum woke to silence. Not the usual mountain quiet, but true silence. The wind had stopped. The assault on the cabin's walls had ceased. He sat up in the rocking chair where he'd spent another night, his back protesting, and looked toward the window. Pale grey light filtered through. Dawn. And beyond the glass, nothing moved. The world outside was transformed. Snow had buried everything under a uniform white blanket at least 4 feet deep. Drifts against the cabin reached 6 feet, covering the lower windows entirely. The pines bowed under the weight branches touching ground. The truck was a white mound in the yard. They were buried, truly buried, and would stay that way until the county plows made it this far up the mountain. 7 to 10 days, the weather service had said. Maybe longer. He looked at the calendar on the wall. February 5th, 2024. Eleanor had been dead 4 years and 3 days. The foreclosure deadline was 41 days away. Numbers that used to matter. Now they felt distant, abstract. Behind him on the couch, Julia stirred. Ranger was already awake, sitting beside her. His routine shifted in the past days to include guarding this new person in their space. Callum went to make coffee. 2 mugs now. Routine established without discussion. As he worked, he heard the wheelchair's uneven roll, Julia maneuvering herself to the bathroom. The broken wheel still wobbled, but she'd learned to compensate. She'd been here 8 days, learning the space, learning to navigate, learning him. He poured the coffee, set both mugs on the kitchen table. A small gesture, an invitation. Julia emerged from the bathroom, wheeled herself up the ramp he'd built, and approached the table. Her blonde hair was cleaner now. She'd washed it in the sink 2 days ago, asked him to turn around while she did it. It hung loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light. She looked different than the half-frozen woman he'd found, healthier, but also more troubled, as if warmth had thawed not just her body, but whatever she'd been running from. Julia wheeled to the glass, looked out at the buried landscape. "We're trapped. For now." She turned to look at him. "How long?" "County plows week at minimum. Lenora's road gets cleared last. We're after that." He sipped his coffee. "Food's fine. Fuel's fine. We wait." And then he knew what she was asking. What happens when the road opens? When you can leave? Then you call whoever you need to call. Get extracted. Go back to your life. She looked down at her coffee mug. "What if I don't want to—" Callum studied her. "Don't want what?" "To go back." The words hung in the air between them. Heavy. Loaded with implications he didn't want to examine. "Not my business what you want," he said finally. You've got a life out there, fiancé, money clearly. He gestured at her clothes, expensive even after days of wear. This isn't real. This is just survival. Is that what Elena was, just survival? The question hit like a fist. Callum's jaw tightened. Don't, he said, voice low and dangerous. Don't compare. I'm not. I'm asking if hiding from grief counts as living or just surviving. You've been here 8 days and you think you know me. I know you built a ramp for a stranger. Her voice was soft but firm. I know your dog chose me and it broke something open in you. I know you talked about your wife for the first time in years. That's not nothing, Callum. He wanted to argue, wanted to retreat behind his walls, but she was right, and they both knew it. What do you want from me? He asked. Nothing. She met his eyes. I'm just saying thank you for letting me see that you're still human under all that armor. Before he could respond, Ranger stood abruptly. His ears swiveled toward the front of the cabin. A low rumble started in his chest. Not aggressive. Alert. Callum's training kicked in. What is it, boy? The dog moved to the door, nose working. The rumble intensified. Then Callum heard it. Faint at first, then growing. A sound that didn't belong in this silent white world. A rhythmic thudding. Mechanical. Powerful. Helicopter. Callum was at the window in 3 strides. Scanned the sky. There, breaking through the low clouds to the south. A Bell 429 black and sleek executive model. Coming fast and low. No, Julia whispered behind him. Her voice was pure dread. The helicopter circled once its rotor wash, blasting snow into a blinding vortex, then descended into the clearing Callum used as a yard. The skids touched down 50 feet from the cabin. Ranger was barking now. Deep, challenging barks. Not rescue alerts. Warning barks. The side door slid open. A man in a flight suit stepped out first. Pilot, clearly. He took up position beside the aircraft hand near his sidearm. Professional. Security. Then the passenger emerged. He was tall, lean, early 40s. Dark hair, perfectly styled despite the rotor wash. He wore a charcoal cashmere overcoat that probably cost $5,000. Black dress shoes that were completely absurd in 4 feet of snow. He stepped down, like he was stepping onto a red carpet, surveying the cabin with an expression of barely concealed distaste. This was Damien Cross. Callum didn't need to be told. Every line of the man's body screamed entitled, controlled, used to getting exactly what he wanted. Julia, Damien's voice carried easily in the still air. Game's over, darling. Time to come home. Beside Callum, Julia had gone pale. Her hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair so hard her knuckles were white. How did he find me? She whispered. Damien pulled a phone from his coat pocket, held it up. GPS tracker in the satellite phone I gave you, sweetheart. Did you really think I'd let you disappear? I've known exactly where you were the entire time. The casual cruelty of it. The surveillance. The control. Callum felt a cold anger settle in his gut. Damien's eyes finally focused on Callum. Looked him up and down. The worn flannel, the faded jeans, the beard, the cabin. Ah, the local help. Damien's smile was condescending. Damien Cross, I'm here for my fiancée. Thank you for keeping her safe. I'll make sure you're compensated for your trouble. Callum said nothing, just stared. Damien's smile faltered slightly. Julia, come on. We have the Anderson Gala Friday. You've made your point. This little test is over. Test. The word hung in the air. Callum looked at Julia, saw the guilt flash across her face, the shame. Test, he repeated flatly. Damien laughed. Oh, she didn't tell you, of course not. My Julia loves her little games. He gestured grandly. The paralysis, the abandoned woman routine, all an act. A test to see if I'd stay. Well, I'm here, aren't I? Helicopter the works. I'd say I passed. The world tilted. Callum turned slowly to look at Julia, at her legs, at the wheelchair, at 8 days of lies. Is that true? She couldn't meet his eyes. Callum, please. Is it true? Yes. Barely a whisper. But not the way he... Callum walked away. Didn't trust himself to speak. Didn't trust what he might do if he stayed in that room. He'd built her a ramp. Spent 2 hours in the freezing cold cutting wood for a lie. Had told her about Elena, opened wounds he'd kept sealed for 4 years for a lie.
Behind him, Ranger's barking intensified. The dog was at the door now, hackles raised. Damien had approached the porch, confident, entitled. "Julia, we're leaving. Now!" He reached for the door. Ranger launched himself at it, slamming his full 85 pounds against the wood, snarling with a ferocity Callum had never heard from him. This wasn't a working dog alert. This was pure protective aggression. Damien stumbled backward, real fear flickering across his face. "Call off your animal!" Callum stood frozen. His dog, protecting her, still protecting her after everything. "Callum," Damien's voice went shrill. "Control your dog." Callum looked at Ranger, at the fury in the dog's posture. This animal had served in war zones, had detected explosives that could kill dozens, had lost his handler and kept fighting, and now he was defending a woman who'd lied to both of them. "Ranger," Callum said quietly. "Stand down." The dog hesitated, looked back at him. The message clear. "Are you sure? Stand down." Ranger backed away from the door, still growling but obedient. Damien straightened his coat. "Julia, helicopter. Now." "I'm not asking again." Julia wheeled toward the door, stopped, looked at Callum's back. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't... I'm so sorry." Callum didn't turn around. She wheeled closer to the door. Damien was waiting, hand extended, to help her, and then she stopped. Just stopped. "No," Julia said. Damien blinked. "Excuse me. No, I'm not going." "Julia, don't be ridiculous. This has gone on long enough." "You left me." Her voice was stronger now. "When you thought I was actually paralyzed, when you thought I was actually helpless, you left me in a freezing cabin and drove away. It was a test. Your test. And you failed." She looked at him with clear eyes. "You failed every single part of it. And then you put a tracker on me like I'm property you need to monitor. I was protecting you. You were controlling me, like you control everything." She wheeled backward away from the door. "I'm not going, Damien. We're done." Damien's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. I can destroy you, Julia. Your company, your reputation, your family's name. Do it." Her voice didn't waver. "I'd rather have nothing real than everything fake." For a long moment, Damien just stared. Then his expression shifted. Cold. Calculating. The mask coming off. "Fine. Stay in your mountain hovel with your broken veteran and his dog. See how long that fantasy lasts." He turned toward the helicopter. "Don't come crying to me when reality hits." He climbed back into the Bell 429. The pilot followed. The rotors spun up, blasting snow in all directions. And then they were gone, lifting into the grey sky, the sound fading until only silence remained. Julia sat in her wheelchair in the middle of the cabin. Callum stood with his back to her, hands braced on the kitchen counter. Ranger moved between them, confused, distressed, looking from one to the other. "Callum," Julia said quietly, "please let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice was cold, empty. "That everything was a lie, that you used my grief, my home, my trust to play out some relationship game. It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" He turned to face her. "Tell me. Make it make sense." She took a breath. "I'm Julia Ashford. My family owns Ashford Logistics. 400 million in assets. I've never had a relationship that wasn't about the money. Never had someone love me instead of what I could give them." "So you faked paralysis to test your boyfriend? To see if anyone would stay when I had nothing to offer?" Tears ran down her face now. "When I couldn't walk, couldn't work, couldn't be useful, would anyone still see me? And Damien didn't. He drove away the first night, left me to freeze." She looked at Callum. "But you didn't. You built me a ramp. You told me about Elena. You let me see who you really are. I did all that for a lie? No, you did it because that's who you are. The paralysis was fake, but everything else was real. My loneliness was real. My fear was real. What I found here was real." Callum laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "What you found here was a broken man and a dog. That's all this is. You're not broken. I'm 41 days from losing this cabin." The words exploded out of him. "From losing the last piece of my wife because I can't pay her medical bills. I'm living on nothing, going nowhere, waiting for the bank to take what's left. That's not noble. That's not some fairy tale. That's just failure." Julia went quiet, processing. "How much do you owe?" "Don't." His voice was dangerous. "Don't you dare." "I'm just asking. $127,000. And before you reach for your checkbook, understand that I'm a Marine. We don't take handouts. We don't take charity. We stand on our own, or we don't stand at all." "It's not charity if I'm paying a debt. You don't owe me anything.
I owe you my life. Her voice broke. I owe you 8 days of being seen as human. I owe you the first real kindness I've had in years. You can't buy that back. I know. She wheeled closer. But I can try to give you back what you're about to lose. Callum turned away. Couldn't look at her. Couldn't process the sincerity in her voice against the weight of her lies. I need you to leave, he said quietly. When the road's clear, I need you gone. The silence that followed was crushing. Okay, Julia finally said. Okay. She left 10 days later. The storm had ended on the 8th day, but it took another week for the county ploughs to reach this far up the mountain. Lenora's road was always last on the priority list. When they finally came through, Julia made the call. Callum helped her load the few belongings she had, lifted her into the Range Rover that Tobias Crane, her head of security, had brought, folded the broken wheelchair into the back, didn't meet her eyes. On the passenger seat of the Range Rover, he noticed a large red rubber ball, the kind rated for large dogs, indestructible. She followed his gaze. For Ranger. I saw him looking at one in a catalogue on your table. Thought he might like it. Callum said nothing. There's also a letter, she said quietly, on your kitchen table. You don't have to read it, but it's there. The Range Rover pulled away tyres crunching on packed snow. Julia looked back once through the window. Callum stood on the porch, a tall figure in a brown leather jacket, one hand braced on the railing. Elena had sanded smooth, Ranger at his side. Then they were gone. Callum stood on the porch for a long time after the vehicle disappeared. Finally went inside. The cabin felt different. Empty in a way it hadn't been before Julia arrived. The couch still had indentations where she'd slept. The ramp was still in place over the steps. On the kitchen table sat an envelope and the red ball. Ranger found the ball immediately, approached it, cautiously sniffed, then nudged it with his nose. It rolled. The dog's ears perked. He pounced, grabbed it in his mouth. For the first time since Elena died, his tail wagged with pure, uncomplicated joy. Callum watched him play. Felt something twist in his chest. He picked up the envelope. Heavy paper. Expensive. Inside was a letter handwritten. Callum, I won't apologize again. You've heard enough apologies from me. What I will say is this. You taught me what real kindness looks like. Not transactional, not calculated, just human decency given freely even when it cost you. I lied about my body, but I never lied about my loneliness, about feeling invisible, about being desperate enough to test love in the most broken way possible. You saw me anyway, fed me, built me a ramp, told me about Elena. Let Ranger choose me even when it hurt you. That's not nothing, that's everything. The ball is for Ranger. I hope he likes it. He deserves joy after everything he's been through. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be human. Julia Callum read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the metal box where he kept Elena's letters. Locked it. Looked at the foreclosure notice. 41 days. Looked at Ranger playing with the red ball, happy in a way Callum hadn't seen in years. She was a liar boy, he said to the dog. A rich liar playing games. Ranger dropped the ball at Callum's feet. Tail wagging, waiting. Callum picked up the ball, looked at it. Imagined Julia in some store choosing this specifically because she'd seen his dog looking at a picture. He threw the ball across the cabin. Ranger exploded after it, a grey blur of joy, and Callum felt the ice around his heart crack just a little more. 3 weeks passed. The snow melted slowly. Spring came in fits and starts, cold, then warm, then cold again. The roads cleared. Life returned to routine. Except it wasn't the same routine. Ranger played with the red ball every day. Every evening he'd bring it to Callum, drop it at his feet and wait, expectant, hopeful. And every evening Callum would throw it, watch his dog play, feel something like warmth in a place that had been frozen for 4 years. On March 8th he drove to town for supplies, stopped at the post office to check his box. Inside was the usual junk mail, a new catalogue, and one official envelope. Wyoming Regional Bank. Callum's stomach dropped. He tore it open, expecting the final notice. The date for the auction. The end. Instead, he found a single sheet of paper. Notice of loan satisfaction. Dear Mr. Rivers, we are pleased to inform you that the outstanding mortgage on property, 14 Delta Sierra Wind River Range, Wyoming, has been satisfied in full. Your account balance is $0. Please find attached documentation for your records. Sincerely, Isabel Grant, Vice President, Loan Servicing. At the bottom, in smaller print, payment remitted by Ashford Holdings, LLC. Callum stood in the post office parking lot, the letter shaking in his hands. She'd paid it. All of it. $127,000. Rage hit first. White hot. Blinding. She'd bought him. Bought his compliance. Bought forgiveness. He wanted to tear the letter apart, track her down, throw the money back in her face. But then he looked at the date. Payment received February 10th, 2 days after she'd left, before he'd asked, before he'd even known. She hadn't done it to buy him. She'd done it and left. No strings, no demands, just gone. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and pulled out the stack of bills he kept in the glove box. Medical bills, collection notices, foreclosure warnings. He'd been 3 weeks from losing Elena's cabin, maybe less. The bank would have taken it, sold it, erased the last physical piece of her from the world. Julia hadn't bought him. She'd saved Elena. The rage drained away, replaced by something more complex. Confusion, gratitude, grief, relief, all tangled together. He drove home in silence, the letter on the passenger seat, Ranger in the back, the red ball in his mouth. That night Callum sat at the kitchen table, the bank letter in front of him, Julia's letter beside it, Ranger at his feet, the red ball in his mouth. He could reject the payment, call the bank, tell them to reverse it, stand on principle, on pride, on the Marine Corps values that said you earn what you have or you don't deserve it. He could lose the cabin, lose Elena's dream, but keep his integrity. Or he picked up Julia's letter, read it again. The bank was taking something that wasn't theirs to take. I just stopped them. Not a gift, an intervention. He looked around the cabin, the walls he and Elena had framed, the floors they'd sanded, the stone fireplace they'd mortared together, her hands mixing the cement while he placed each rock. She'd loved this place, loved every nail, every board, every imperfect corner. And she'd told him, made him promise not to let pride kill him. Callum reached for the phone, dialed Lenora. "It's Callum. I heard about the payment, hun. You okay?" Pause. Long silence. "I don't know how to accept this, Lenora. Maybe you don't accept it for you. Maybe you accept it for Elena, for what she wanted." More silence. "She told me to let someone in," Callum said quietly, "before she died. Made me promise. And I think maybe this is how." He hung up, looked at the bank letter, at the zero balance. Ranger dropped the ball at his feet, tail wagging, waiting. Callum picked it up, threw it across the cabin. The dog chased it, joyful, free. And Callum made his choice. That night, Callum did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He opened the metal box, took out Elena's letters, read them again. Found the one she'd written 3 days before she died. Her handwriting shaky from morphine but still legible. "Cal, don't let the quiet kill you. I know you. I know you'll hide when I'm gone. Build walls. Push everyone away. Don't. The cabin was supposed to be our beginning, not your end. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you'll ever do. Don't let pride kill your second chance. Let someone in. I love you. Always." Callum read it 3 times. Then looked at Julia's letter, at the bank notice, at the red ball Ranger had left by his chair. He thought about a woman who'd lied about paralysis, and a woman who'd told him the truth about pride, and he wondered if maybe they were both right. Spring came in full force in late April. The snow was gone except in the deepest shadows. Green was returning to the high country. Elk were moving back into their summer range. The cabin was warm without the wood stove. Callum was fixing fence line when he heard it. An engine, old, struggling, coming up his road. Ranger's head came up, his ears swiveled, but he didn't bark, just watched. A truck emerged from the tree line. Ford F-150, late 90s model, forest green, rusty wheel wells, Montana plates. It pulled into the clearing and stopped. The driver's door opened. Julia stepped out. She wore jeans, not designer, just regular Levi's. A flannel shirt, work boots. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry. She looked nothing like the woman who'd arrived in a Range Rover. She looked real. Callum stood 50 feet away, hammer in his hand, Ranger at his side. They looked at each other across the muddy spring yard. "What are you doing here?" Callum's voice was neutral. guarded. "I came to see Ranger." At the sound of his name, the dog's ears perked. He looked up at Callum, waiting for permission. "Go ahead," Callum said quietly. Ranger exploded across the yard, hit Julia at full speed, nearly knocking her down. He was a whirlwind of wagging tail and happy whines, jumping up to put his paws on her shoulders, licking her face. She laughed, a real laugh, wrapped her arms around him. "Hey, boy, I missed you too." Ranger ran in a tight circle, then tore back to the porch, grabbed the red ball, brought it back to Julia, dropped it at her feet. You're back. Play with me." Julia picked up the ball, threw it. Ranger chased it with pure joy. Callum walked slowly toward her, stopped 10 feet away. "Why'd you pay the debt?" Julia looked at him. "It wasn't for you." "Then who?" "The bank. They were taking something that wasn't theirs to take. Elena built this place. She loved it. You told me that. I just stopped them from stealing it." "That's still $127,000. It's money. I have money. What I don't have—" She stopped, started again. "What I didn't have was a place where someone saw me as human." "So you bought it?" "No." Her voice was firm. "I protected it. There's a difference." Callum studied her. The old truck, the cheap clothes, the absence of everything that had screamed wealth before. "What happened to Damien?" "Served him papers the day after I left here. It's over." "And the company?" "Still mine. I'm just running it differently now, remotely." She gestured at the truck. "Downsizing, simplifying, trying to figure out what actually matters." Ranger brought the ball back. She threw it again. "You didn't have to come back," Callum said. "I know." "So why did you—" She looked at him. Really looked. "Because in 8 days in that cabin I felt more real than I'd felt in 8 years outside it. Because your dog chose me, and it meant something. Because you built me a ramp even though you knew something was wrong. I was wrong to trust you. Maybe. But you trusted anyway. That's not weakness, Callum. That's strength." He wanted to argue, wanted to stay behind his walls. But he was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of the cold. He looked at Ranger playing with the ball Julia had given him. At the cabin, he still owned because she'd intervened. At the woman standing in front of him, asking for nothing, offering everything. He thought about Elena's letter. "Don't let pride kill your second chance." Callum let out a long breath. "I don't forgive you. I'm not asking you to. But I'm not sending you away either." Hope flickered in her eyes. "No. Storm's coming in tonight. Temperature's dropping. You shouldn't drive that truck in bad weather." The corner of her mouth lifted. "Is that right?" "That's right." He nodded toward the cabin. "Come on, I'll make coffee." She followed. Ranger bounded between them, the red ball in his mouth, tail wagging furiously. They walked into the cabin together. Callum made coffee, 2 mugs, set them on the table. They sat, drank in silence. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Outside, the spring storm rolled in. Gentle this time. Temporary. Inside, Callum sat in his rocking chair with a field manual. Julia worked at the kitchen table laptop, glowing soft. Ranger lay between them, the red ball tucked under his chin. The fire crackled. The wind whispered. And the silence that had nearly killed Callum Rivers, was no longer empty. It was full. He looked at the photograph on the mantel. Eleanor, laughing hand on Ranger's head. 4 years frozen in that frame. "I'm trying, Elle," he said quietly. "I'm trying." Julia looked up, caught his eye, smiled. Callum nodded, went back to his book. And somewhere in the mountains, in the space between what was lost and what might be found, the ice continued to thaw, one quiet moment at a time.